The sting of a wife's betrayal cuts deep, not just in what it represents but in how it feels. A woman's infidelity is often perceived as a triumph over her husband, a green light for whatever she chooses to do next. History is peppered with examples of such feminine cunning. Countless stories tell of wives who switched allegiance to their husband's worst foe, even if that very man had once brought harm to her family. When the opportunity for intimacy arises, especially far from home, perhaps at a resort or during a business trip, traditional values, religious beliefs, and family ties often melt away. Freedom, combined with the advances of eager men, can lead a wife to indulge in infidelity, sometimes with pride, and rarely does she stop after that first transgression. An unsettling mix of superiority and disdain for her clueless husband may grow within her, sometimes leading her to boast about her exploits. And what of these so-called triumphs? The husband might remain in the dark, but oh, how satisfying it must be to witness his humiliation. It's heartbreaking. No one deserves such a fate. Those husbands who are truly loved or at least respected by their wives are indeed fortunate. As for the others, many wives refrain from cheating not out of loyalty, but from fear of losing their material security. This, sadly, is the reality of modern family life. My own story began with a whirlwind romance. We met at a party and quickly became inseparable. After almost a year of dating, we were so close to each other that words were hardly needed. Our hearts were beating in unison. We got married young. I was 20, Evelyn was only 19. 9 months later, we had a son, and 4 years later, another one. Life was good. We didn't complain about anything. I graduated from university and was soon drafted into the Army, where I stayed, making a career. At that time, the Army was well paid, and there was no question of returning to the meager salary of an engineer. My earnings were enough to feed us, and Evelyn didn't have to work. Unfortunately, right after our wedding, my parents died in a car accident, leaving me with my grandfather Mason, who lived far away in the countryside. It was simply impossible to move him closer. My military career developed smoothly. 5 years later, I was sent to Germany. A year later, I was sent to Africa as an instructor. During one operation, my armored personnel carrier was blown up by a mine. I was sitting on the armor with my legs dangling over the side when the explosion threw me 7 meters off the road. I landed heavily on my back and lost consciousness. When I came to my senses, I could hardly catch my breath. The compassionate doctor at the hospital told me that I was incredibly lucky. If I had landed on a rock, the game would have been over, at least with a fractured spine. Anyway, I survived without serious injuries, although the doctor warned that complications could occur later. In the meantime, I had to live my life and cherish my happiness, which I did, especially with my family. I found myself on business trips all over the world again. In Serbia, Africa. I served until I was 45 and retired for health reasons with the rank of colonel. Now, before you decide that this is a grand achievement, let me make it clear. Colonels come in 3 types: Mr. Colonel, Colonel, and Hello Colonel. It just so happens that I am one of those who belong to the friendly type. I have a modest pension and the usual set of officer medals. Fortunately, my parents' old 3-bedroom apartment was still available in my hometown, and we moved there. We had stashed away enough cash to cover the first round of services, so we managed to get by initially. Everything would have been just fine. But then the aftermath of that back injury started to rear its ugly head. It began with some nagging pain in my back and lower spine. But soon enough, my legs started going numb, followed by excruciating pain shooting through my spine. And before long, my left leg gave out entirely. Slowly, with a heavy heart, I found myself reduced to a shadow of the person I once was, no longer fully human in my own eyes. Now, I won't claim that life was all bad during this period. There were ups and downs like any other, but there was no cheating, neither on my part nor my wife's. Everything seemed to take a turn when Evelyn went back to work after I was discharged from the Army. That's when things started unraveling. Recently, I've been in and out of the hospital more often, sometimes staying there for extended periods. There was a stretch where I was receiving treatment and going through rehab for nearly 6 months. At first, my wife would visit me regularly, but then she started to fade away. My son showed up and told me that his mom had broken her leg and couldn't come to see me. Evelyn finally appeared about 4 months later, explaining that she was in rehab herself, and so on. On the surface, her attitude toward me seemed unchanged, but that was just on the surface. Evelyn began to go on business trips often, sometimes for a long time. In addition, she went to the sanatorium with a friend several times, claiming that she was too tired. She could hang on the phone for hours, but hung up as soon as I approached. I had a feeling that Evelyn was seeing someone, but for a while I kept my suspicions to myself. And then one day, while browsing the internet, I logged into Facebook and came across my wife's page. She must have forgotten to log out. It was then that I found a rather intriguing photo. It showed a smiling family, in which a woman bent her head to a young man who was holding her hand. A 1-year-old child was sitting on the man's other arm. And there was my Evelyn, playing the role of a happy woman. I dug through her friend list on the site and found this guy, opened his page, and nearly lost it. One of the photos showed Evelyn with a baby, being embraced by the same man from the first picture, and the caption read, "Our baby." So if you ever have a gut feeling that your wife is cheating, trust that feeling. It's probably spot on. What a twist of fate. Oh, Evelyn, not only is she carrying on an affair, but she's actually juggling 2 families and even had another child. When did she manage all this? After piecing things together, it hit me. It must have started while I was stuck in the hospital for that long stretch. She must have gotten pregnant before that, but it was still early enough to go unnoticed. And then, the whole broken leg story, it all started making sense. I decided not to jump to conclusions and to dig deeper before doing anything rash. With the help of a former colleague, who happens to be a cop, I got the lowdown on this woodpecker who'd swooped in on my Evelyn. Turns out, he's 7 years younger than her, goes by the name Matteo, and big surprise, he's a businessman. He'd been seeing my wife for almost 2 years, and apparently he's smitten with her and wants to tie the knot. That's when I knew it was game over. If a woman has a child with another man, there's no going back. I've never bought into that whole fight for love nonsense. Love either it is or it isn't. No amount of fighting will change it. If love's gone, you can bash your head against the wall, but it won't bring it back. Time kills love. While I was mulling over how to confront Evelyn about where we stood, fate took care of things for me. One evening, Evelyn brought her businessman to our home. They sat down in the living room and launched into a heart-to-heart with me. Or rather, he did the talking while Evelyn just nodded along. The gist of it was that Evelyn was still young, and I was holding her back. Staying with me would ruin her life, and so on. I sat there, listening patiently, but when he suggested I vacate the apartment, my parents' place, and move into a home for the disabled, I invited him to come a little closer. Clueless, he leaned in with that smug alpha male grin. Evelyn knew what was coming and tried to warn him, but it was too late. My right hand landed squarely, and he felt it like a sledgehammer to the jaw. His eyes rolled back, and he went flying into a corner, cracking his head against the wall. I knew I'd gone too far. One punch wouldn't change anything, but it was something, at least. Of course, Evelyn screamed and rushed to revive her lover, all the while cursing me out. Impotent, cripple, parasite, drop dead, was among the kinder things she threw my way. I just listened, letting her rant until her boyfriend came back to reality. Then I calmly suggested they get the hell out of my house. The guy, spitting blood from his busted teeth, threatened to deal with me in some dark alley, then picked up his treasure and left. As they walked out, the woman I once loved so dearly, the one I would have given my life for, didn't even glance back at me. I'd lived long enough to learn this bitter truth. Women can abandon their past loves with a swiftness and cruelty that's utterly heartless, without a second thought. I was bracing myself for the businessman to report me to the police, but it never came to that, probably because Evelyn convinced him otherwise. What finally broke me was when my kids decided to move in with their mother and her new husband. A sick father. Not something anyone's signing up for. I spent the next 2 months drowning in booze, lost in a perpetual state of drunkenness. Inside, everything felt dead, burned out. When I started confusing day with night, I realized I had to get out of there. Either head to my grandpa's place in the wilderness, or end up either totally wasted or completely insane. During all that time, my kids never called, not once, and they didn't answer when I tried to reach out. There was nothing left for me in that city. I stood in the bathroom, staring at the sorry figure in the mirror. What a sight. Puffy, drunken face with those broken capillaries spidering across my skin, bags under my eyes, long greasy hair, and a beard that looked more like a ragged mop. The only things that reminded me of my past were the silver army badge hanging from a worn-out shoestring, a memory from the Balkans, and the bat tattoo on my forearm. We'd been pinned against the mountains back then, trapped with no way out. Enemy fire was pinning us down from both flanks, forcing us to hunker down and attempt desperate breakouts over and over, each one costing us dearly. There was nowhere to go, enemy ahead, sheer cliffs behind. Before long, only 7 of us were left from our already depleted company. The enemy fire was so relentless, we couldn't even lift our heads. I was down to my last magazine, and the barrel of my PKM was so hot, you could light a cigarette off it. Well, Owen, looks like we're done for, the battalion commander muttered, calling me by my last name. One more attack, and that's it. I suggest we surrender. I slapped in the magazine and pulled the bolt back. What's the point? They'll just finish us off anyway. They won't waste time on us. The battalion commander dragged his machine gun closer to me. Then let's make sure they pay dearly for it. The day was quickly fading into evening. Long shadows were already stretching across the ground when I heard a rustle behind me and some rocks tumble down. I spun around, finger on the trigger. An old man dressed all in black emerged from behind a pile of rocks in our rear, waving his hand. "Come on, follow me. There's a path here," he urged. And just like that, we slipped away right under the enemy's nose. As we made our way through the pass, the monk who had led us vanished without a trace, leaving us with no chance to thank him. It was as if he'd never been there at all. Later, in the nearest small Serbian town, we commissioned silver tokens from a local jeweler. We even had our own material, a chunk of a silver thimble cross that we had found in the ruins of a destroyed Serbian church. There was just enough for all of us. Each survivor wore that token like a talisman, never taking it off, no matter what. I let out a sigh and picked up the scissors. At the station, I had no trouble buying tickets for the evening train and sent a telegram to Grandfather Mason. A new chapter of my life was about to begin. I came back to the city at the end of March and was immediately swept up in a whirlwind of events. As soon as I turned on my phone, it started buzzing with notifications about missed calls. Most were from the battalion commander, a few from unknown numbers, and to my surprise, several from Evelyn. What could she possibly want? I didn't waste any time and called the battalion commander first. "Owen, we need to meet. There's something we need to discuss. How's it going anyway?" The battalion commander's voice was brisk and no nonsense, fitting his call sign perfectly. "When and where?" "Let's meet at the Plaza Hotel restaurant tomorrow around 7 p.m. They won't let me in with my mug unless I clean up a bit. Shave, splash on some cologne, and most importantly, wash your jeans. Stop messing around. I'll be waiting," he said and hung up. I went into the bathroom and took a look at myself in the mirror. I really do look like a mug, but so what? I chuckled to myself, curious about what he wanted to talk about. I felt fantastic, almost couldn't believe there was a time when I could barely move. My back wasn't hurting anymore. though every now and then I'd wake up at night with a twinge in my left leg, like a ghost of the old injury. I peeked into the fridge, completely empty, but that was nothing new. When I left for the city, I'd grabbed a piece of bacon and a jar of pickled mushrooms, so now all I needed was to run out and get some bread. The doorbell chimed. Odd. I'm not expecting anyone. I open it. There's Evelyn standing right on the doorstep. Well, this is a surprise. Truth be told, I wasn't exactly thrilled to see her. Owen, I'm begging you. Just hear me out, she whispered, barely making eye contact. Can I come in? Step into the kitchen, I replied, allowing my unexpected visitor to pass. She perched on a stool, staring at the floor in silence for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. Owen, I left Matteo. Oh, really? Wasn't it a grand love affair? Or have you found someone new? Frankly, I couldn't care less about her drama with Matteo or whoever. The fact that I didn't have bread for dinner was a bigger concern at the moment. And what about our child? Did you give Matteo a ride? Owen, that child isn't his. He's your son. I saw tears well up in her eyes. Matteo did a DNA test, and everything came out clear. And how does that change anything? What's the difference? Why are you here? Run out of money. I glanced at my watch, signaling that I didn't have time for this nonsense. You made your choice. You, him, and the kids. So what do you want from me? Owen, the boy is sick. He needs money for treatment. What's it got to do with me? Why am I involved? I don't have any spare cash. Owen, I'm pleading with you. He's in intensive care right now. The doctors say if he doesn't have surgery soon, he won't make it. I have no money. And the apartment, it can be sold. Evelyn, have you completely lost it? Owen, we've spent 20 years together, she began. I remember. I cut her off. When I was shattered, when you walked out on me, did you give it a thought back then? It struck me how much this conversation felt like a scene from some second-rate melodrama. Owen, I'm sorry. Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you. She was nearly in tears. I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed you, our family. She kept talking, and I just stared at the woman I had once loved beyond reason. The woman for whom I would have laid down my life without a second thought. The woman who, without a shred of hesitation, coldly betrayed me when things got tough. The same woman who erased me from her life and went off with another man. And now, out of the blue, she sees the light and comes to me for help. Evelyn was adamant that her time apart from me made her realize just how deeply she loved me. She claimed she now understood that I was the only real man in her life. Her words began to weave a spell, pulling me into the fantasy that her heart had always been mine alone. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. She kept repeating the words like a mantra, and I watched her, picturing her kissing and holding her lover. Did she really think I'd fall for this? That she was just confused, that she didn't know what she wanted? This woman, who cheated on me, had a child with another man, left me, and spent her days with him, wants me to believe that she never stopped thinking of me. That she's back because she's discovered she only ever loved me. Back then, she had found some excuse for her betrayal and didn't hesitate to leave me in the dust. She had no problem enjoying her lover's company, indulging in the pleasure of his bed, all while plotting the final fatal blow to my heart. God, do I really look so naive to her, ready to swallow all her lies? I listened to her remorseful monologue in silence. I had plenty to say. When things got tough, did you suddenly remember you had a husband? Now you're here begging for money. I couldn't care less about you and your problems. I didn't finish. Out of nowhere, Evelyn dropped to her knees. Owen, please, help me. He's just a little boy. He's innocent in all of this. We're crammed into Mom's room right now. We would have sold her apartment, but we've got nowhere else to go. Evelyn broke down, tears streaming down her face. Evelyn, just leave. I turned away, not wanting to see her cry. Why should I care about her or her child? And don't get in my way again. Evelyn must have picked up something in my tone, and without wiping away her tears, she headed for the door. Owen. She tried to say something more. Get out. I was nearly shouting. The front door slammed shut. I never did go out for that bread. Evelyn walked down the street, dusted with the season's first snow. She knew there was no more hope. She wanted to scream in despair, but stifled it with her hand. Evelyn took the last trolleybus to the hospital. Jack lay in a separate room, hooked up to a ventilator, his small body entwined with tubes and IVs. Her mother sat beside his bed, a white robe draped over her shoulders, her face etched with worry. Well? Her mother asked, looking at Evelyn. Evelyn shook her head, her expression heavy with despair. Owen refused to help. She buried her face in her hands and broke down in sobs. Well, hello, Owen. A familiar voice greeted me. Hi, battalion commander, I responded. We embraced, then stepped back to take a good look at each other. Time spares no one, not even the closest of friends. The battalion commander hadn't changed much. His hair had turned silver, but it suited him. He was dressed sharply in a severe gray suit with a subtle sheen, a crisp blue shirt, a purple tie, a Swiss Hanoa militaire watch, and a platinum ring on his right ring finger. He looked every bit the part of a respectable businessman, as if he had a stake in an oil pipeline. We had dinner at an upscale restaurant on the 8th floor of the Plaza Hotel, where the battalion commander was staying. The place was buzzing with activity. Efficient waiters moved about, and an orchestra played something with a Latin American flair. The decor was a mix of antique furniture, vintage guitars adorning the walls, and the sprawling lights of the city shining through floor-to-ceiling mirrored windows. The juicy chops had already been served, and we poured ourselves another round. To our people. The battalion commander raised his glass, skipping the customary clink, and downed his vodka in one go. He shut his eyes for a moment and exhaled. Well, what's on your mind? I chewed on a piece of chop, letting out a deep sigh. Don't sigh like a bride before her wedding, he teased, picking up some sliced meat with a fork and placing it on a piece of bread. The pay is excellent. Everything's covered, full benefits, the whole package. You get the idea. Sounds like you're trying to recruit me for a strip club. I chuckled. The battalion commander didn't share in my amusement. We fell into a brief silence. So, what's your decision? He asked, glancing at his watch. I'm in. When do we leave? I'll be in touch, he said, standing up, signaling that our conversation was over. The doorbell rang, jolting Evelyn from her pillow. Sleepless nights had taken their toll, and she struggled to get up and answered the door. Who's there? The courier. Evelyn Vyacheslavoovna. Is that you? Yes, that's me. Evelyn opened the door. A courier. She wasn't expecting any deliveries. A young guy handed her a package. This is for you. Please sign here. Evelyn glanced at the package and saw her name on it. Who's it from? I'm not sure, ma'am. My job's just to deliver it. Goodbye. The guy turned and hurried down the stairs. Evelyn walked into the kitchen and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were documents folded in four, a deed of gift for an apartment, and a set of keys. She couldn't believe her eyes. Owen had given her his apartment. Overwhelmed, Evelyn sank into a chair, her legs too weak to hold her up. There was also a note in the envelope. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper. Tears blurred her vision, but she managed to read. Not so I. Goodbye. There was no signature. The helicopter circled a bend in the Mwangi River, its propeller churning the brown waters below. Let's set down. The battalion commander barked over the intercom. The helicopter banked slightly and descended, aiming for a narrow strip of beach near the jungle. The pilot skillfully touched down on a flat area, narrowly avoiding the surrounding trees with the rotor blades. The engine cut off, but the blades continued to spin. What's the status? The platoon commander asked. Everything's normal. The navigator responded, opening the door. Soldiers in camouflage, without any insignia, jumped out onto the sand, rifles at the ready, forming a defensive circle. The battalion commander and I were the last to exit the helicopter. I instinctively slung the PKK over my shoulder and began scanning the area for our local guide.